Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. Today we will be discussing Theme 1, the role of the great powers in the Middle East. I'm sorry for the long wait, but I hope you are all enjoying the new school year. Before we begin, I want to let you know that this textbook is what I base my PowerPoints off of. I strongly recommend you buy it as it is a great resource for this course, and a link will be in the description. Also, throughout my videos, I will reference this textbook and its pages at the bottom of each PowerPoint around here, so you can take deeper notes for yourself if, for example, something that I say doesn't quite make sense, or if you want to research the issue further. As always, subtitles are available and you can find timestamps in the description below. Today, we will be going through Theme 1 and its phases. In Phase 1, we will discuss the impact of the Ottoman Empire. In Phase 2, we will explore the impact of Britain and France and their mandates, also including Britain's conflicting promises and its control of Egypt. In Phase 3, we will explore America and the Soviet Union and their dynamic within the Middle East, exploring their roles in the different wars. Lastly, in Phase 4, we will see America's power and its influence after the Iran-Iraq War and its role in both the First and the Second Gulf War. To begin with, we will explore Phase 1 and the Ottoman Empire. During the Middle Ages, Muslim Arabs made vast advancements in medicine, mathematics, and architecture, creating a powerful society. Then, in the 16th century, the Ottoman Turks, who are Muslims but not Arabs, make sure you don't forget this, took over the Arab land. This forced Arabs to pay taxes and provide soldiers to Turkey. As a result, in 1913, the Arab Nationalist Manifesto was published, calling for independence from Turkey. As we step into Phase 2, we can see why the Ottoman Empire is important. The First World War demanded a lot of oil, therefore Britain, as you can clearly see here, was worried that the Turks could cut their supply from Persia. As a result, they encouraged Arab rulers to overthrow the Turks, seen in the Macmahon-Hussein letters of 1915, where Macmahon established British support for Arab independence, which in turn caused the Arab Revolt of 1916, where the Arabs freed themselves. Despite the previous agreement, Britain decided to secretly plot with France in a 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, which dictated how they were going to share the Arab land after taking it back from Turkey. So as you can see here, Britain went behind the Arabs' backs and instead plotted with France to share the land that the Arabs just freed for themselves. Looking deeper into the Sykes-Picot Agreement, we may ask ourselves, why? Why did France and Britain choose to go under the Arabs? Well, there are three simple reasons. First, gaining all this land would mean a wider opportunity for trade. Secondly, Britain wanted to establish itself as a main power in the Middle East, achieved through gaining control of the Suez Canal, which also provided income to both Britain and France. Lastly, the First World War meant that Britain needed allies more than ever. Therefore, splitting the Arab land would be beneficial for both Britain and France, strengthening their friendship. Phase 2 also looks at the different mandates and the power they had over them. Here, we can see that the French mandate of Syria allowed them to have free elections, as the French were mainly interested in foreign policy. Despite this, the Syrians wanted their independence, which was rejected in 1936. France also had control of Lebanon, which, in comparison to Syria, was slightly easier to control as it had a Christian majority and attempted to maintain a balance as the roles of those in power were split between different religions. For example, there was a Christian president and a Muslim prime minister. Despite this, Lebanon also wanted their independence. However, like Syria, their treaty was refused in 1936. In both cases, France remained a strong colonial power which had censorship, military control, and did not allow nationalism. Although they had control over both countries, they tried to improve them both by building roads and schools. By 1945, when the role of Britain and France decreased, independence was granted to both countries, and by 1946, all troops left. If you really want to push yourself, I recommend you look into the Algerian War of Independence. French held Algeria as a colonial property, and there were many issues between the two countries, and this could make for an interesting comparison or just an interesting point in your essays. Britain also had three mandates: Transjordan, Iraq, and Palestine, though, as you can see here, Palestine will be analysed in deeper detail in my next video, which will cover theme 2. In Transjordan, they received their independence in 1923. Transjordan was essentially handed over to Emir Abdullah, who then went on to building roads and schools with subsidies from Britain. As you can see here, a subsidy is essentially just a way for a country to give another country money. In this case, Britain aided Transjordan to expand by providing them money. In comparison to Transjordan, Iraq was more attractive to Britain in terms of opportunities such as oil. As mentioned earlier, Britain took control of the areas previously owned by the Turks, and in 1918 they had control over 3 areas. As a result, in 1920, rebellions broke out, asking for independence, leading Britain to deploy 100,000 troops. This caused Britain to lose control, and as a result they invited Faisal to become king, causing uncertainty in the borders and issues with Turkey and Iran and its 3 different groups, the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shias. In 1932, Iraq finally received its independence and was admitted to the League of Nations. However, Britain kept 2 air bases and controlled the oil, keeping their hold over the country. Britain also held power over Egypt. The Suez Canal was opened in 1869 at the cost of Egyptian lives, as they were made to dig the canal out by hand. They also began occupying Egypt from 1882 until 1950. In 1914, more specifically, Britain came to Cairo and seized crops, as well as forcing labour. The revolution of 1919 was sparked by an arrest. This in turn excited the Egyptians, and many demonstrated, only for them to be killed by the British. In 1922, finally, the Egyptians had independence, though just as in Iraq, Britain kept some sort of power by keeping the Suez Canal and military bases in Egypt. In a 1936 treaty, Egypt was seen as an independent state and finally joined the League of Nations. As we look into Phase 3, we can see why America and Soviet influence rose. In 1956, Nasser, the Egyptian president, nationalized the Suez Canal Company. This angered Britain and France as it was a source of income for them. As a result, joined with Israel, they secretly planned to attack Egypt, recognized as Operation Kadesh. Upon hearing this, America became infuriated with the 3 countries, as it could have caused Nasser to lean towards Soviet aid. The 1955 Czech arms deal also strengthened the friendship between Egypt and the Soviet Union, establishing themselves as a rival to America. Now we will explore how the US and the USSR were involved in the wars of 1956, 1967, and 1973. In 1956, America slightly leant towards Egypt to help them, but they only did this out of self-interest, as it didn't want France and Britain to topple Nasser over. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union provided arms to Egypt through the 1955 Czech arms deal. In 1967, America became more pro-Israeli after witnessing their victory, and the Soviet Union lost their credibility after providing false intelligence to Egypt. In 1973, America provides arms to Israel, but instructs them not to overthrow Cairo, as a huge defeat might have led them to overthrow the Egyptian president Sadat and might have led to an establishment of a more radical and pro-Soviet government. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union provided more help in terms of arms, but began declining in strength and influence. Stepping into Phase 4, we can see how the role of America began increasing. Now we will explore the Iran-Iraq War. Before we begin, it's important to note that there are different branches of Islam, Shias and Sunnis. The Iranian leader, a Shia Muslim named Ayatollah Khomeini, began calling up other Shiites in Iraq to overthrow their Sunni leader, Saddam Hussein. As a result, Iraq attacked Iran. This was done to establish their own power, but also to gain territory from Iran and in turn profit from Iran's oil and turn it into an export. This was doable, especially as Iran was weak due to the fall of the Shah in 1979. Countries with Sunni rulers, listed here, heavily supported Iraq and provided them weapons and arms. The West also became involved as they supported Iraq. America notably became involved due to being fearful of losing their oil supply in Baghdad. France also provided support by sending arms. The ceasefire, which came in 1988, witnessed the deaths of 1 million Iranians and 500,000 Iraqis. After the Iran-Iraq war, the Iraqi economy suffered badly. Hussein was also losing his power as there were attempts at overthrowing him from 1988 to 1990, and Kuwait was demanding Iraq to repay the $14 billion loan. The most important reason, however, was Hussein's invasion of Kuwait with 300,000 troops. Upon the King of Saudi Arabia's request, America became involved as they were worried that oil supplies in Saudi Arabia may be vulnerable. 34 countries made up a coalition to end Hussein's invasion. This included Arab countries such as Egypt and Syria, but also the involvement of Muslim countries such as Bangladesh and Pakistan. This quashed the West versus Arab argument. Furthermore, the UN imposed trade sanctions until Iraq left Kuwait, stopping other countries from being able to trade with Iraq. Despite the trade sanctions, Hussein chose not to leave Kuwait. As a result, in January 1991, America bombed Iraq for 5 weeks. In February 1991, Iraqi troops left Kuwait but set oil alight. And finally, in March 1991, there was a ceasefire based on peace terms, including no-fly zones to ensure the safety of the Kurds in the north, payment of reparations, and cooperation from Iraq to destroy all weapons of mass destruction. The sanction impacted Iraq heavily. Their small oil exports were not enough to buy food imports for the population, as in the past, 70% of their food was imported. This caused high rates of malnutrition and infant mortality. Furthermore, Iraq was not allowed to import chlorine due to fear of chemical weapons. This caused the spread of contaminated water, and many died of dysentery. It is estimated that between 250,000 and 500,000 children died due to the trade sanctions. After America and Britain bombed Iraq in 1988, many Arab states began to trade with Iraq once again, which eased the pressure of trade. In 2002, Bush accused Iraq of still holding weapons of mass destruction, despite the United Nations statement that upon inspection, nothing was found. However, the US still wanted to invade Iraq to topple Saddam. As a result, in 2003, the Coalition of the Willing was created, consisting of America and Britain, along with a small number of Australian and Polish troops. The US seized oil fields and many key buildings. Basic services such as water, electricity, and sewage disposal were essentially rendered unusable. Organized gangs became commonplace, as well as looting, which caused the country to descend into chaos. Iraqis clearly tried to fight back by demanding for basic necessities such as water and electricity. However, the US simply fired upon these crowds. Furthermore, many Iraqi soldiers lost their jobs as they became demobilized. Despite America's attempts at trying to rebuild buildings, insurgents bombed these buildings, causing them to be neglected by everyone. Only the north of Iraq with Kurdish zones remained safe. In 2005, America and Iraqi allies organized national elections and established a new Iraqi-run government, bringing back law and order and decreasing death tolls by 2008. The final American troops left in 2011, but the majority of the country was still in chaos. Here are some practice questions that I did when I was at school, as they were provided by my teachers. If you don't feel like writing an essay to them right now, I suggest you try to at least plan or just look at them and think of some key dates that you could apply to these questions. Even if you don't do it now, maybe you can try doing it later, because it's always good to keep practicing. That's the best way to learn how to write essays successfully. And this here is a table I constructed with all of the important dates in theme 1 that I just spoke about. You can organize these however you want. In this case, I divided them for you in terms of countries, so how we just spoke about Britain, France, the Soviet Union and America. But when I did it for my personal revision, I decided to make a stack of flashcards for theme 1, and I had all of these dates, but they were in chronological order rather than being separated in countries. This made the most sense to me, but it was also a massive stack of flashcards, so I'm not sure if it will work for you. Obviously, just try any technique and see what works for you the best. It's always good to keep practicing. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you later. Bye bye!